Hello, and welcome to the Out of Curiosity podcast. My name is Jason Velasco, your host today with the Kindato Global Advisory and Technology team. And today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Barbara Flügge, who was introduced to me through my partner, Jason Thompson. So, Barbara, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Jason.
So, this is our first time actually chatting and getting to know each other. So this is completely, from a trampoline perspective, we are we're starting from scratch. So, um, tell me a little bit about your background and how you know JT or Jason Thompson, my partner.
Yeah, of course. Well, from my background, let's say I have 25 years in digitization and change management and transformation expertise, right? So, from my business background, I'm German by nature, let's say. But as you see in the background, for those that actually see the video, I'm living for more than 15 years in Switzerland, so right next to the Alp region here. Yes, I travel around the globe. I lived in Spain as well. I lived in various different countries and also worked in several different continents. And yeah, I'm a consultant, I'm a speaker, I'm an author, what you also see. I'm also lecturer, mentor, and coach. And also good to know is I'm an artist. So I'm a painter, I'm an expressionist.
Hmm.
So I feed, let's say, my rational, but also my creative sides of the brain. And Jason, I know because of one of my pillars of digital value creators is digital coaching.
Hmm.
So it's actually a program for teachers to help them get the content about media and digitization to teach the children. So that's the focus there. And I met Jason through his activities from ProScholar here in Switzerland.
Yeah, that's amazing. We've been doing a lot of research on the learning management piece, and you may not know this, but I taught as a substitute teacher in high school for
Great.
several years back in my early 20s before going into technology. So it's always something that I've been passionate about. So tell me a little bit about your PhD and what do you have a PhD in?
I have a PhD in management and economics. So I completed it at the school of the Tilburg University in the Netherlands.
Hmm.
And I actually wrote and researched about business to government collaboration. So I was always fascinating not only about the let's say the bilateral relationship between a customer, let's say, and the supplier, for example, but actually about the network. So who are the ones that are involved in making things happen? And when you look at export and import, what is for globalization and global businesses key and fundamental? So you look into all the various different distinct stakeholders. And the project I actually did was about export and import. So from European countries, European member states to non-European member states. And I worked on a project, and then I wrote about and researched about the collaboration. So from legal, economic, security, all matters that actually are related between businesses and the governments in that respect. Yeah.
And so what is the trend that you're seeing nowadays related to that? Because I mean, the as I've always framed it, public-private type of activities is pretty standard here in the United States. What are you seeing both in the EU as well as other global regions?
Yeah, I mean, the point is, I did my PhD um, 12 years or even, yeah, let's say later than I completed my diploma, right? So I was already for a long time in business. And at that point in time, it was quite new to look into digitization and to actually have everything around digital services. So to serve even small companies to export or import. And it took really, I think, up till last year, the pandemic, to realize what it means to have a digital service. So what are you doing as a small company manager, for example, and your products get stuck or your components get stuck somewhere in the world, and you're not able to actually physically access them to ship them to your customers. So I think one of the trends is about like confirming the relevance of truly digitizing physical activities, but not by copying them and not by electronifying them, but by really introducing a novel and innovative approach. So that's one side, right? The other part is, or the other trend is to look into the roles of governments. I mean, that is really, it has to change. It's not just fulfilling, let's say, a legal requirement. It's about enabling those that are, let's say, if you are Swiss government or German government or Austrian or US American, what can you do to stimulate the local business, right? And stimulate it in a way that is still sustainable. And so it's more growing together, I would say. It's becoming more of a network and not just a typical one by one relationship and one waits for the other what needs to be done, right?
So Barbara, one of the things that I was introduced to over the last few months was the Estonia model, right? Which is with X-Road. I don't know are you familiar with that, with what they're doing with X-Road and the digitalization of Estonia? Are you familiar with that?
Well, I'm not sure if why it's called Estonia model, but we looked into that also in the research project when I did my PhD about what they did already in the past on digitization, healthcare, insurance, mobility services, all captured in one card, right?
Mhm.
So if you're referring to that one, otherwise, please explain, and then I can.
Well, and I think that's exactly right, right? Which is using,
Mhm.
I mean, it seems like they're doing a whole, e-government digitalization
Yeah.
process. And maybe if you can explain that, because, that's something that,
Mhm.
from the most part
Yeah.
especially with our US listeners, have probably have not been exposed to that at all. So,
Okay, I give you one simple example actually. I was once speaking at a conference, but not in Estonia, but in one of the other Balkan states. And they said, we do it now like in Estonia. So you speak at a conference, you get by the conference operator a hotel room, and your room key, the little card, right, gives you not only access to the room, to your hotel room, but it's also the entry card to use the public transportation system. So it's also being readed there. So there's a card reader. Let's put it like this, right?
mhm.
And even more fascinating, it's also the your registration confirmation for the conference. So they read it there as well. So it gives you access. It's an access card, right? And so it captures everything. What is fundamental about you as a citizen, or in a case like being there for a conference or as a tourist. I call it being a temporary citizen, so that of course your data is being captured there, but it is accessible to the governmental institutions or the healthcare institutions, and of course to yourself. So let's say you would have, hopefully not, but an accident, right? You don't have to handle around all this paper stuff and the templates and the forms, and you have one card, right? And it gives everyone who has the right, the permission to access it, gives everything what is relevant, and you don't have, let's say, also any errors or mistakes because you don't speak the local language. And I think that's one of the fascinating things. It helps you actually to become that temporary citizen, and translates it for you because it's digitized. Yeah.
So I think that that's a great segue into your program and book, Mobility Moves Minds, and because I want to dig a little bit more, because I have a lot of I'm very curious about the data privacy aspects of mobility and data privacy and things like that, and digitalization. But could you tell us a little bit about your program that
Yeah.
you're sharing now?
Yes, of course. I mean, I work in the mobility sector as such. I would say even more than 10 years now. And what I do is actually I look into not only the physical mobility when you move a product or you travel, right? But I look into digitization, into the digital mobility part. So when you like to embed your physical movements with digital services, being customs declarations, being other kind of requisitions you need to fill in. I also look into how can you add a physical and a digital service to each other, right? So let's say you like to go and have a coffee at let's say Starbucks or Rosie or Einstein, what we have in Germany,
Hmm.
another coffee chain, right? So you get a nice little mug, right? Let's say with a motif from Berlin. And when you go to New York City, you have the New York City mug. And digital mobility means that you can scan the map and you see the sign of or the shapes of New York City, and then you get suddenly the videos accessible. And you get some life stories about New York City.
Hmm.
So the program is about how actually mobility is not only enhancing digital societies and digital businesses. I think it's a fundamental need. There is a right to mobility for everyone and everything. And what I learned in the past years, because I publish and research about mobility for many, many years, as I said, but there wasn't really a change. I mean, we still had congestion jams in the cities. You find in Europe the let's say, yeah, the loss of city centers of the real identity because everyone orders online, right? So what is happening there? And I said, we have technology and we have everything, let's say, in our hands, but we are not really using that. We're not really combining it. And that's why I said there's a third element of mobility, and it's mental mobility, it's cognitive flexibility. And that's why you find in the book cover or on the book cover this little swirl. I call it like the eye of the hurricane. If you're not coming out of it, it's, let's say, it can be devastating, but it's also a chance to look at the swirl and look into these three-tier mobility. So make use of creativity through a certain method. And then that helps you to transform physical mobility needs and identify digital mobility. So combining what is physically there with the digital use of technology. Yeah.
So is this a behavioral thing for a user? Is this something that either technology firms have to adapt, or is this something that individuals have to adapt to?
It's actually more. I think it's a very good question because yes, it is a behavioral change. And I looked into that, like when you investigate the topic of resilience or resiliency, right? That's a term psychologists like to use. So, what does it take to overcome an incident or a negative event? And that's why I started in the book with 17 life stories, because I wanted to know what it means to overcome a negative event and make something positive out of it.
So can you
And
give us an
why?
example?
Well, the example, for example, when we talk about a person that lost a job, right? Or that faces, let's say, for example, a salary cut, it's a negative event. So you can give in and you can say, I'm not really worth it. I did a lot of mistakes, or I was just selected randomly. And you can cry, you can put yourself somewhere in a corner, or you can look at it and say, okay, this is a chance now to look at a different job portfolio. It's a chance now to maybe I go into a different and move into a different geography. Maybe I always wanted to do this and that. We always have these kind of thoughts and ideas when we sit at a coffee table with colleagues or friends, and where we say, if I one day I would like to do this and that. So when you're overcoming that and you take a negative event to really consider something freshly and newly, then you have a chance there, right? And so resiliency means that you take these incidents and look at that and actually work with these impacts, right, on yourself. So, and that's what you asked is about the behavioral change. That's let's say the change on the individual level. And I wanted to know what it means to have people that have a resilient level, a certain, let's say, maturity of resiliency, and if that makes it different in businesses. So if you have resilient people in your business, would a company, your business, overcome negative incidents easier or not? Right? Would a company fail more often if they are people that just do the job, like typically 9 to 7 or 9 to 5? Sorry for that, 9 to 5. Or
Hmm.
so I wanted to investigate if there's a dependency on the individual side, right, and on the managerial side, and that's
Yeah,
a complex thing. Sorry,
yeah,
it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really interesting point, and part of it is resiliency is almost very independent. I mean, and it becomes to, like, for example, one of the things that I like to do and is to understand kind of people, what their strengths are. So I use a tool called Clifton Strengths. I don't know if you've used that in the past, which is by Gallup, and it identifies kind of your five core strengths, right? And resiliency is one of those that's on there. But is that asking too much of people to be resilient if that's not in their nature?
Well, that's a good question. The point is, I said, or as I said, I interviewed and worked with 17 people right from around the globe
Hmm.
because I wanted to know if there's a difference in culture, if there's a difference in the geography, developing countries, industrial countries. And the interesting fact was that any of the business people I talked to, they experienced in the even in childhood, let's say some events, or they observed it. So I would say if everyone goes back and takes some time or takes, let's say, 1 or 2 hours walk and think about an event that really stimulated you or that really hurt you in the past, everyone has minimum one incident or one event. The question is what the person made out of that. And I call it like an incident analysis to look into your actions and your reactions based on that event, right? So it's about making yourself aware of that. And it goes deeper than mindfulness, this typical mindfulness exercises, what
Hmm.
HR departments like to do, or these training units at businesses, because a resilient behavior is like, I would say it's like a jacket you put on, like a Gore-Tex jacket, and it makes you, let's say, protected, like from rain and thunder and hurricanes. And so it should become, I think, a daily habit, right? To look into what does it take, because we always have negative events happening.
So, how do you help people understand how to become more resilient?
Well, out of these 17 stories, we identified 99 key takeaways. So, from very individual key takeaways about looking into like a past event in the childhood, for example, looking into what happened in your business, in the business career. So, that's the first thing that helps. I would say that helps individuals to look into that and helps in the reflection. Yeah. And then I'm taking them over into more the background work, right? So what does it mean to be, let's say, be creative? So what does it mean to do scenario building around it, right? Because I like to take it into the business level. I like to look into what makes companies more resilient. Yeah. So, and that means I need to activate, or they have to activate their creativity, intelligence, their creative intelligence, and not just the technology or the digital intelligence. So to really make use of that, it's really to go. I call it the R tool. It's like a flow of activities, and one of the first elements is actually to allow your employees to look into incidents and listen to them. So to have a human sensing, apply a human sensing. I give you one example. You're working at the warehouse of your company, and you know exactly when a certain delivery shipment is coming in, let's say from one specific supplier. In 2 out of 5 cases, the packages are somehow not really packed, or there's a damage there happening, and you know it's like a constant thing what's happening. But as you're working in a systems environment, you actually let it go, right? But you know, and you tell your friend at the dinner and say, again, this delivery was not okay, right? Something is happening with that supplier. I tried to talk to my manager, but he said, come on, it's still okay, it's still okay. No, nobody complained yet at the customer side. Or the account executive that hears, let's say, a conversation, overhears something, right? And then at the next corner, there's another conversation about the same client. And he said, I have a gut feeling that something is wrong. So one of the first steps is really what I call to establish resilience scouts, like trend scouts, what you know from that observe the fashion trends, to look into what are the trends when it comes to the market, to the voices in the market. And you can systemize that. I mean, it is a structured approach. It's not just like gut feeling. So it takes a number of key criteria and attributes to walk through. Yeah.
You bring up a interesting point because I tend to be very resilient in nature, and one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the mechanisms that I've developed as part of both my practice, both building a business and consulting, was to me resiliency is also built on redundancies and knowledge, right? So how do you make sure like I have a goal. My management goal is that if I win the lottery and that the organization continues to live on. And that becomes kind of my North Star for making sure that I've tracked and documented and educated and mentored and shared knowledge with the appropriate people. And I encourage that throughout the entire organization to have that same culture. What do you think about that approach?
Well, there's one key difference. I mean, resiliency is not tenacity, right?
Okay.
So if you might need to correct your North Star and put it a little bit like 5 grades east or west, it's okay. I mean, it's about looking into the energy that you're consuming. I mean, it's about letting adjustments happen as well, right? And working towards one goal is fine. The question is, are you facing, let's say, incidents that harm your business and really would destroy your objective? So it is about going deep dive into let's say the cause and effect of an incident. I mean, most of the companies might answer these days it's a pandemic that caused the revenue cut, right? But when you look deeper, it might be that it started 5 years ago because there was a change or a new product being introduced, but it was not really checked in the market. And let's say you it worked well for the first years, but suddenly it actually already reached the peak much earlier than you expected it. And I think that's really key. So redundancy, yes, it's fine. I think as long as you know that if an incident is happening, the next incident, you still are able to cope with that, then you're on the right track, right? But let adjustments also be happen. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about the mobility piece. I mean,
yeah.
to me, when I see mobility moves minds and things like that, I mean, I'm fairly nomadic as in part of my as part of my life. I travel a lot and I like to bounce around. How does that impact companies now that we're doing more work from home, and having people like myself that really don't have a kind of a fixed address, if you would. I'm not in the same office every day, 9 to 5 or 10 to 7 or whatever the hours are. How does that approach an organization as we start transitioning to that world?
That's a good question. I mean, most of let's say most of the voices or statements I heard about mobility and physical versus digital mobility is that they say we do video calls.
Mm,
And the point is that for companies, firstly, they're facing the challenge of a disconnect to the employees, so to the staff, because you cannot observe, let's say, how your employees feel or how they actually, let's say, pursue their activities if you only see the one part of the body, right? Because I mean, that's a way of how to dress and how to act, and there is a distance, right? I mean, it's a natural distance through the technology. Yeah. So that's about the connect, about from manager to employees, right? The other disconnect I think that's happening, and I was criticized a lot about that by my brother-in-law, because in Europe, or in Switzerland, especially in Germany, we have this phenomenon of short term work, right? So because of the pandemic, people don't work 5 days a week; they're cut down to 3 days a week. Yeah, and or 4 days a week, and then they get a salary cut, and that's how companies compensate the revenue loss. Yeah.
Hmm.
But what they're losing, these companies, is innovation time. So it's an innovative capital, actually, what employees bring to the table when they work 5 days a week. They also work on ideas. They work on innovation processes or in innovation processes, right? And that's to a certain extent that has been cut off because of home office. You focus on meetings and meetings. You discuss, of course, the burning issues, but
Hmm.
the innovative time, the creative, the scenario building time, that's actually losing, let's say, the priority that it had before, right? So that's that side of the mobility. The other side of the mobility is about when you are a company with a physical product and you're not able to ship it
Hmm.
because there's a ripple effect in the supply chains, right? So mobility moves minds means that you use the creativity, the creative mobility, to identify digital services that enhance your physical product or might even replace a physical product because you can ship it right now. But you can introduce a service or you can introduce a bundle, a service digitally, and you find suppliers on site where the customers are, and you don't have to ship it the long way, let's say from Switzerland to Vietnam or to China, right?
Right.
So you enhance your product portfolio because of a physical constraint and ideate and innovate the digital element. And here, and actually, you get closer to your clients because through a digital service, you can exit it anytime. You don't have to wait till the product is there. You can already feed the appetite, of your clients while the product is hopefully arriving a couple of days or weeks from now. Yeah.
Right. And that becomes more of a partnership with your potential clients,
Yes.
and they're innovating with you, and it's
Yeah.
creating the bonds much in a much stronger manner.
Yes. Exactly. So
Interesting.
it's a total. It's a different way of acting, not in this typical customer supplier relationship, but it's really enhancing. Like you said, it's building a relationship. It's building even a co-creation ship in that respect as well. Yeah.
So how can people continue? I mean, I hear the term, we're an innovative firm. We're
Mm.
innovating, and it's become kind of a buzzword, almost like blockchain and AI and things along
Mhm.
those lines.
Mhm.
Um, how do organizations that are remote find ways to empower innovation within their organizations?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, on the one hand side, you find a lot in companies or looking into setting up a co-innovation lab, right? So they say, okay, here's a fixed element or a fixed room, mostly a physical room, where we go and then we ideate, we innovate. So, and we look into what could be the next step of our company, what could be the next product, the next big thing, how we always called it in my former company. I work for a global software provider, right? And we had this NBT, the next big thing. So I look at it now differently because what I found out through my career, and I worked in nearly all of the value chain positions. So from product, from trend scouting up to consulting and product development in between, is that even the innovation process gets standardized. It gets standardized because of technology, where you have these ratings and where you have, let's say, a management or a team that looks at innovative ideas, and then they do the rating, and then they skip out or cut off the others, and you just get, let's say, a filtering process, and the two top ideas will make it. But this innovation process actually gets so standardized that let's say the most creative ideas, the most crazy ideas are not being actually apparent anymore. They get lost. And then the companies look into acquiring a startup or at least partnering with a startup. because this is where the crazy ideas is being found. But what they're missing is the drawer. I call it the drawer phenomenon. So to work with the old school talents in a company, the subject matter experts, and look what they already put in their drawers, but nobody was actually, or not many were listening to them. So where the ideas were, that's the case with 3M, right?
Hmm.
So the post-it note was not developed just right away. It was actually sitting in the drawer, the whole concept, for years. And what companies don't have these days is time to really go there and wait for years that someone opens up the drawer and say, hey, that's great. We always look for that, right? So what I did is I developed a tool. I call it the Resilience ABC. I took the 26 letters from the ABC and thought about what is the way to move from this physical mobility level to the digital mobility level, so the creative, the middleman, let's put it like this, right? And I tested it with various different industries. If that actually helps to ideate more in a shorter time and to come up with more of these crazy ideas. And it works, right? It works because it's so strange to look into letters as a vehicle. And if you take, let's say, the first letter of your company name, let's say the K actually in the scoring model of the resilience ABC is a complex. It gives a higher resilience score because of the shape of the K, right?
Hmm.
And that's actually what I like to do, and what I also did in the past 2.5, 3 years. I designed tools to actually help to go in a more systematic, but also in a more creative way, and find innovative, let's say, let's say first ideas, but and then let's say, of course, to the business cases, the business rationale around it, and look into if that's a viable idea or not. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and I definitely would like to learn more. So I'm definitely going to buy your program, because I'm fascinated by this now, because we've,
Yeah.
at Kindato, we've launched an innovation studio ourselves, right? Which is, where
Mhm.
we're actually bringing through different
Yeah.
technologies, ranging from data privacy technologies
Mhm.
to content technologies to,
Mhm.
all kinds of different things, because, we're a young, hungry startup that has a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
But having been at some of the larger companies like yourself, I also know that you need to actually have some framework of a process in order to guide that idea through for some level of success, right? And I'm always torn between, letting the creative minds just do the abstract painting, if you would, and seeing what evolves, versus, there are steps and process to
Mhm.
create and make a product for a successful launch. And how and I'm working through trying to reconcile that as well. So I appreciate your insight on that, because it's helpful. Do you have any advice for someone like myself that's trying to kind of work through those things, besides buy your book?
Well, one thing is, of course, this question about many ideas versus the one next big thing,
Hmm.
right? I went through these processes as well, and then to look into the business cases. I was a business case reviewer for the CFO department at my former company, and I had to assess, let's say, various different innovation labs or lab ideas, right? And what was for me, what was the most, one of the, let's say, the very typical mistake actually some units made, was they stick too much, too tight, too close to the current business.
Mm.
And not because of, let's take an automotive company. I told an automotive company to forget about that they are designing and building very nice cars. And they said, no, we're an automotive company. I said, you have to forget that. Because if you like to really embed what you already have in your legacy, the car, with an innovation, you have to forget about it. You have to forget about the car, because the car was not invented because car existed. So and the techniques I have is one thing is about this, the ABC. But what I also developed was, I call it persona profiling. Some find it, I think it's a little bit of a strange term, but it actually looks into archetypes of consumers.
Mm,
And but not only individuals, not human beings. I look into, I mean, you see in the background of the slide here, this alpine region. I look into a region. I look into a city district being a consumer. I look into means like transportation means being a consumer. If
mhm,
you put yourself into being a bike, you have different ideas what you need than if you look into the one who rides the bike. So when you look for the holy grail, like what you said, and you have the innovation labs for content, you mentioned artificial intelligence, blockchain, VR, for example. Um, I'm not looking, let's say, I'm not looking into technology. I'm looking into I call it enthusiasm, experience, and excitement.
hmm,
So I would like to design and offer to organizations, but also to consulting companies, experiences, and then look into what technology or what bundle of technologies and processes would actually be able to make that happen. So when we look into the region of the Alpine region, you can imagine mobility is a challenge. How can you actually ship something over there? Um, on the other hand, it's an excitement because it's a very touristy area. So what would you invent for such a region? Would it be like in Scotland, they implemented two huge horse heads because it's a region where they're actually very famous for the local, I don't know the right term in English, but where you raise horses, right?
mhm,
And it was a region everyone was just passing by because they wanted to get to the Isle of Skye, from Edinburgh to the Isle of Skye. Nobody was looking left and right. Nobody stopped or left the autobahn. So, and then they implemented these large scale horse heads as sculptures, but sculptures you can actually access internally. You can climb up, and at night they get illuminated. So there are now restaurants there are cafes, there are shops. And suddenly it turned into a touristic area. And
mm,
people stopped at the Autobahn and, oh, this is great, we have to go there. And suddenly they created an excitement. And the excitement was based, of course, also of the heritage, because the area is known for horse racing, right?
mhm.
And racing horses, actually, as well, so race horses. So my recommendation is to work with me. So when we look into that, because I like to go really 3 times around the corner, but I always work in a network approach. So when I assess, let's say, for a customer, a specific innovation, I look into all the stakeholders, so the known and the unknown ones, that could influence that innovation. There might be 100 different stakeholders, but there might be also 1,000. I mean, I always look into the network. So I'm building and designing ecosystems, and then look into the common denominator. What is common, and what is expected for everyone involved. So I did this once for one region in northern Germany. So I looked into 950 organizations and looked into who is actually steering whom. So where is a dependency, but where is also, let's say, where is a new form of relationship? Yeah. Um, yeah, it is. It is. It is. I have about 30 KPIs
Right.
to do ecosystems assessment, right? So where I look into these dependencies, but I also have a pretty good sense about where, let's say, where you have to put the needle on the map and where you
Right.
can actually take it out and go somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting, and it sounds like what you've been doing is taking an amazing career of trying to understand all these things and trying to share them in
Yeah.
a manageable way. And it's I'm very impressed, and I cannot wait to read your materials and dig a little further.
Thank you.
The other thing that I saw that you're involved with is an organization called Homeless Entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and that caught my eye because my biggest fear, like my dead biggest fear is homelessness. And
Mm,
so
mm.
I was really curious to hear about that. And can you tell me a little bit about that organization and what your role is in that?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Actually, Homeless Entrepreneur is a non-for-profit organization out of Spain. So they reside in Barcelona, founded by Andrew Funk from the US. So he's US American citizen. And actually, they found me. So because when I published one of my last books on smart mobility, not that one, but the other one 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, he contacted me and he said, based on what you wrote about mobility use cases, so scenarios how to make use of mobility, we actually found from our organization that it helps to end homelessness. And I said, what case? I mean, what did you implement? What? And he said, well, actually, one of the homeless persons is Rafael, and I know Rafael. I talked to him. He actually got an e-bike, and he's actually picking up the corks from the restaurants, right? So to bring it back into a circular economy cycle, so where they actually refine the corks he's collecting, and it's only possible because of the e-bike he has, because he's traveling around, he's doing around 40-45 kilometers a day throughout the city of Barcelona, and collecting in normal times about 40 kilograms, yeah, of of
Wow.
of this cork, yeah. And I wanted to talk to them then. I said, yeah, let's have a talk, and I'm interested in if my ideas about mobility, and mobility also mental mobility, can help you to end homelessness. Because that, like you were saying, I mean, you said it's your fear. I think it's the fear of many people. I mean, I already worked before I talked to Andrew. I always looked into homelessness because a friend of mine got homeless when I was living in the States. I experienced one night of being without everything. And I was really afraid of that. But I also said, okay, so let's see what is the solution ABC to get out of this situation. And this was a time when no mobile phone existed, and I was in a different country, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't have any money, and I thought, I think it's somehow, I'm not saying fate maybe, but I think it's a good coincidence that he contacted me. So, and mobility moves minds. When you look into the resilience, I mean, what kind of, let's say, stability but also environment do you need to overcome homelessness? I said, I like to really look into this mobility moves minds project by ending homelessness. So 1/5 of any revenue goes to homeless entrepreneur, because their idea is to generate jobs. So the more I sell from the books or from workshops, for example, as well, I then can look into how to generate jobs. And that might be, let's say, looking into, well, one of the idea is to set up a hostel, but not a typical hostel like for tourists,
Hmm.
but to look like in a working hostel where they can actually come have a place where to stay, but actually get help to go back into a working environment, because stability and working hours is very important. And one of our supporters is the CEO of a job center from Germany, from the city of Wuppertal,
Hmm.
Thomas Lenz, and we talked a lot about homelessness and how to, let's say, if you're in that situation, what does it take? What are the parameters you have to establish to help a homeless person to get out of that? And Andrew himself, he was homeless, so he experienced that, also the separation from the family and all that. And I think your fear. I have another organization I started to work with, I think, a year ago. It's for children in south of Germany, and every fifth child in Baden-Württemberg, and it's one of the richest provinces from Germany. You know,
Hmm.
this is where Daimler and Porsche and all these famous car manufacturers are. Every fifth child is facing children poverty in that province. and it's because the parents are poor, they lost their jobs, and we distinguish job loss and home loss. And with the pandemic, it's getting tighter and tighter, the net of actually looking into that it's yeah there is more probability to lose the job and then the home, right? So
Right. Well, we'll definitely make sure we put a link in our podcast
yeah,
for
please.
the homeless entrepreneur. I think
Yeah.
it's just a very interesting organization, and thank you for opening the eyes on that.
Mm.
Um, Barbara, how can people get a hold of you if they've got questions around Mobility Move Minds or your consulting practice or even the homeless entrepreneur? How can they reach out to you?
Well, they can reach out to me either on LinkedIn, so Barbara Flügge. I have this German Ü, and then on my website, barbara-flügge.com. And then we can also publish my email address and the link to my calendar there as well. And I'm a pretty responsive person, so yeah.
Yes, you have been. You've been amazing getting this coordinated and taking care of
Mhm.
business and getting you set up has been a phenomenal and a joy. We'll make sure that we include all of those links in
Yes.
the in the in our liner notes. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate you sharing your time, your insight, your experience. This has been very eye-opening for me, and in fact, you've even raised more out of curiosity questions for me. So I'm looking forward to continuing future conversations with you in the very near future. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time again.
Thanks as well. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining this edition of the Out of Curiosity podcast. Please like and subscribe down below, and we look forward to our next episode. Have a wonderful day, and look forward to catching with you soon. Have a good day.